Lady Louise Windsor did not hesitate, soften her voice, or look toward the senior royals for permission. Standing inside a private reception room at Windsor Castle, she delivered 7 words that instantly transformed a strained family gathering into a royal crisis. "Camilla will never be my family." Sophie froze. Edward lowered his eyes, and across the room, the Queen Consort remained motionless, as the meaning of Louise's rejection settled over everyone present. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The gathering had been arranged after weeks of growing tension over Louise's place within private royal events and her connection to Queen Elizabeth II's legacy. A private royal gathering is a closed family meeting without public access, usually intended to settle personal matters before they affect official duties. Sophie and Edward hoped the conversation would restore calm. Instead, it exposed a wound neither parent had fully understood. Camilla had spoken first. The Queen Consort described her relationship with Louise as one built on maternal trust, and suggested that younger royals needed guiding women who could represent stability after Elizabeth's death. Louise listened until Camilla referred to herself as part of that maternal circle. Then the young royal delivered the sentence she had carried into the room. Sophie reached instinctively toward her daughter, but Louise stepped back. The movement was not a rejection of her mother. She feared that comfort might break the resolve she had spent days building. Edward understood immediately. He lowered his eyes because he knew the words had not appeared from nowhere. Camilla gripped the back of a chair but refused to sit. Controlled confidence gave way to humiliation as she realized 2 senior aides had witnessed everything. The Queen Consort could challenge the language later, but she could not erase the moment. Louise had rejected not merely a title, but an emotional claim. Charles had been expected within minutes. An aide quietly closed the door and left to warn the king that the meeting had already erupted. His arrival now threatened to turn a private confrontation into a direct test of loyalty between his wife, his brother's family, and the granddaughter of the late queen. Louise then revealed through the recorded family account that her statement had been prepared. She had discovered Camilla privately attempting to redefine which women could be presented as maternal guides to the younger generation, placing her own name ahead of women Louise actually trusted. Sophie leaned closer and whispered, "What exactly did you discover?" The statement had stunned the room, but its true force could only be understood by looking at the 4 people now trapped inside its consequences. To the public, Lady Louise had always appeared calm, dutiful, and almost untouched by the storms surrounding the crown. But inside Windsor, her silence had never meant acceptance. It meant observation. She had watched her mother remain loyal, her father surrender personal comfort to duty, Charles struggle between marriage and monarchy, and Camilla seek a position within relationships that had existed long before her. Now, every hidden wound had converged in one room. Louise had learned to define family through consistency rather than rank. Sophie protected her without demanding attention, while Edward offered steadiness when palace expectations became difficult to carry. Queen Elizabeth II had given her something quieter but equally powerful: affection without pressure. The late monarch's bond with her granddaughter was personal, not ceremonial. That distinction mattered because Louise had never believed a title could create trust where years of shared experience had not. Camilla understood belonging in a very different way. The Queen Consort had endured years of public hostility before standing beside Charles as his wife. Acceptance by the younger generation had therefore become more than a family desire. It was proof that her place beside the king had gained emotional legitimacy, meaning recognition based on genuine personal trust rather than legal status alone. Louise felt that calling Camilla family would diminish the women who had actually guided her. Her words defended Sophie and preserved Elizabeth's memory. The rejection sounded hostile, yet beneath it lived a fierce form of loyalty. She would not allow royal language to rewrite the relationships that had shaped her life. Sophie stood between her daughter and the Queen Consort, devastated that the pressure had reached this point. The trusted confidant feared the damage Louise's statement might cause, but pride moved beneath that fear. Her daughter had refused to betray her emotional truth, simply to make powerful people comfortable. Edward noticed the folded card pressed inside Louise's hand. He asked what it contained, but she closed her fingers around it and said Charles needed to see it first. The answer unsettled him, because Louise was not reacting blindly. She had brought evidence. Camilla understood the danger before anyone else. Her deepest pain was not rejection. It was the realization that Louise knew about a private conversation the Queen Consort believed had remained confined to only 3 people. Charles entered moments later and read the crisis on his wife's face. The king immediately understood that this was no careless sentence. Someone had attempted to reshape the family's private loyalties, and Louise intended to expose exactly how. As Charles asked everyone to sit, Louise placed the folded card on the table, bringing the buried history behind her statement into the open. The crisis had not begun with Louise's declaration. It began 11 days earlier, during a private remembrance ceremony inside St. George's Chapel. What should have been a quiet tribute to Queen Elizabeth II became the moment Louise realized someone was attempting to alter the emotional history of the family. There were no cameras and no crowds, only a rearranged place card, a missing name, and one sentence from Camilla that Louise could not forgive or forget. The chapel service had been arranged for close relatives to mark an anniversary connected to the late Queen. A private remembrance ceremony is a family observance held without public attendance, allowing relatives to honor someone away from official spectacle. Each younger royal received a handwritten card naming the family figures who had shaped their values. Louise expected to see Sophie and Elizabeth, the 2 women she associated with safety, discipline, and quiet affection. Louise noticed the change moments before the service began. Elizabeth's name had vanished from her card. Camilla's appeared in its place. Then the Queen Consort spoke to an aide within Louise's hearing. "It is time the younger ones recognized the family as it is now." The sentence transformed an altered card into something far more personal. It suggested that memory itself was being reorganized. Louise waited until the ceremony ended before confronting the aide. She asked who had authorized the replacement, but he refused to answer. His silence gave her all the warning she needed. The young royal searched a discarded folder and recovered the original card, hidden beneath unused papers. That evening, Louise placed both versions before Sophie. Her mother became pale when she saw the difference. The trusted confidant understood that this was not ceremonial housekeeping. Someone had attempted to claim emotional authority over her daughter by erasing a bond that could not defend itself. Edward uncovered an even darker possibility. Similar changes had been proposed for remembrance cards belonging to other younger relatives. Louise's experience was not an isolated mistake. It appeared to be part of a broader strategy to redefine who the next generation should publicly recognize as its guiding family figures. Now the original card rested before Charles at Windsor. Beneath Elizabeth's printed name remained a short line in the late Queen's own handwriting. Camilla had either overlooked it or never known it existed. Charles stared at his mother's words before turning toward his wife. The king asked whether she had ordered the replacement. No advisor moved. No aide spoke. The chapel card had revealed the motive, but the confrontation that followed would force Louise and Camilla to say aloud what neither woman had previously dared to admit. Camilla did not deny changing the card. Instead, she defended it. That choice turned an uncomfortable family dispute into a devastating face-to-face confrontation. With Charles seated at the end of the table and Sophie standing beside the window, the Queen Consort told Louise that the monarchy could not remain emotionally frozen in the past. Louise listened without interruption. Then she pushed the altered card across the table and asked one question that shattered Camilla's defense. Camilla explained that the change was meant to reflect the present structure of the royal household and show unity around Charles's reign. A royal household is the family, staff, and advisors who support the monarch's work. To her, the card was symbolic. It acknowledged who now stood beside the king and represented stability in the current chapter of the crown. Charles tried to separate ceremonial meaning from personal affection. The king argued that a name on an official remembrance card did not erase private love. Louise refused that distinction. The card had not asked who held the highest title. It had identified a trusted guiding woman. That made the alteration deeply personal. Louise looked directly at Camilla and asked, "When did you earn the right to replace someone I loved?" Silence took hold. The Queen Consort finally understood that the young royal was not attacking her marriage, title, or position beside Charles. She was challenging the assumption that authority could create emotional entitlement. Camilla answered that she had spent years trying to hold the family together through scandal, grief, and division. Louise did not retreat. She replied that holding a family together did not mean rewriting the people who had already held it. The words struck with brutal force because they exposed the difference between service and possession. Charles placed his hand over Elizabeth's handwriting and asked whether any other remembrance materials had been altered. Camilla hesitated. The pause was brief, but it revealed more than a confession. Everyone understood that Louise's card had not been the only one considered for change. Sophie then spoke. The trusted confidant admitted that palace staff had approached her about describing Camilla publicly as a maternal source of guidance to Louise. She had refused the wording, but she had kept the request from her daughter because she believed silence would prevent further conflict. Louise turned toward her mother. Hurt replaced anger. Sophie had rejected the proposal, yet she had still allowed decisions about her daughter's identity to remain hidden. Camilla's authority had been challenged, yet the most painful discovery was that decisions about Louise had been made by people who believed they were protecting her. Behind the emotional confrontation stood a harder question. Who possessed the power to define family inside the monarchy? Camilla held the title of queen, Charles held the crown, and palace advisors controlled ceremonies, language, and public presentation. Yet none of them could command affection. As officials began examining how Louise's remembrance card had been changed, one uncomfortable reality emerged. The machinery of the palace had treated a young woman's private loyalties as something that could be edited. Charles's household had approved the remembrance program, but the final wording had been delegated to a small ceremonial team working under guidance from Camilla's private office. A ceremonial team is the group responsible for official wording, seating, symbols, and the order of family events. That structure gave the Queen Consort influence over presentation, but no formal right to redefine Louise's personal relationships or remove Elizabeth from an intimate family tribute. Charles sat alone with the original card after the meeting ended. The king traced his mother's handwriting more than once before setting it down. His grief made the issue impossible to reduce to protocol. The alteration had wounded him as a son before it embarrassed him as monarch. Someone had treated Elizabeth's memory as an obstacle to be managed. Sophie confronted the senior aide who had delivered the revised wording. The trusted confidant demanded to know why he had accepted such a personal change without consulting Louise. He admitted believing that compliance would prevent fresh tension between Charles and Camilla. His explanation exposed the real weakness inside the palace. Fear of conflict had become more powerful than judgment. Edward refused to let the inquiry stop with one card. He demanded a full list of every program, speech, and private ceremonial note altered under the same guidance. The request mattered because it could reveal whether Louise had faced a single intrusion or a wider attempt to reshape how the younger generation described its loyalties. The search uncovered several references still awaiting approval. One draft caused the room to fall silent. A proposed family biography described Camilla as having developed a maternal bond with the younger generation, including Louise. A family biography is an officially approved account used to shape the public understanding of royal relationships. Louise had never agreed to that language. Charles immediately froze the biography and ordered every related document returned for review. The king believed he was correcting an abuse of influence. Camilla heard something else. To the Queen Consort, his decision felt like abandonment at the exact moment her position was already under attack. The palace could halt the language on paper, but it could not stop the emotional consequences already moving through the royal household. The first consequence arrived before sunset. Camilla canceled a scheduled family dinner, left Windsor through a private entrance, and returned to Clarence House without speaking to Charles. Her departure was not announced, Yet every member of the household understood its meaning. Louise's rejection had crossed from private pain into royal division, and as one door closed behind the Queen Consort, Sophie faced the possibility that her daughter's honesty had created a fracture no apology could repair. Camilla's withdrawal left Charles at Windsor, with Edward, Sophie, and Louise, creating a physical separation no palace explanation could disguise. Clarence House is the London residence closely associated with the King and Queen Consort's private household. By leaving for it alone, she transformed a family argument into a visible split between two centers of royal loyalty. Palace staff moved quickly. They removed the altered remembrance materials, restored Elizabeth's name, and returned every disputed reference for review. The decision confirmed that Louise's objection had already changed official language. What had been presented as harmless ceremony was now recognized as an intrusion into private identity. Camilla reached Clarence House and placed her gloves beside an untouched tea tray. She dismissed her private secretary and waited until the door closed. Then the Queen Consort began crying. Her grief was not truly about one card. It came from the fear that Louise had spoken for an entire generation that might never accept her emotionally, no matter what title she carried. Sophie tried to explain her own silence. The trusted confidant told Louise that she had hidden the earlier request because she wanted to protect her from palace tension. Her daughter answered that protection without honesty had left her unprepared to defend herself. The words wounded Sophie because they were impossible to deny. Edward then admitted that he had also remained silent. He had feared confronting Charles and believed the issue might disappear if no one challenged it. Louise looked at her father differently after that confession. She had always trusted him to speak before pressure reached her. Instead, he had waited until the damage was done. Charles soon received a handwritten message from Camilla. She would not return to Windsor until he decided whether her place in the family was genuine or merely ceremonial. The king read it twice, but he did not defend her immediately. Charles ordered every phrase suggesting automatic maternal relationships between senior and younger royals removed from future documents. That night, Louise found him waiting outside Elizabeth's former sitting room. With the palace machinery finally silenced, Louise and Charles were left to confront the human truth that official meetings had only obscured. There were no secretaries in the room, no prepared statements, and no ceremonial distance between king and niece. Charles asked Louise to sit beside him, not across from him, and admitted that the card should never have been changed. For the first time since the crisis began, she lowered her guard. But Louise did not apologize for her statement. Instead, she explained why the word family carried a meaning no title, marriage, or palace instruction could ever manufacture. Charles told her he had never personally approved the altered card. The king accepted responsibility for allowing a household culture in which people acted to avoid upsetting Camilla. A royal household culture is the unwritten pattern of fear, loyalty, and habit shaping how staff make decisions. Charles understood that by avoiding conflict, he had created the very conditions that allowed Louise's feelings to be rewritten without her consent. Louise answered carefully. She did not want to humiliate the Queen Consort or deny the reality of her marriage to Charles. Camilla was his wife, and Louise respected that bond. What she refused was the suggestion that institutional language could decide whom she trusted, loved, or recognized as family. Charles then admitted something more painful. Grief had sometimes made him welcome the appearance of a healed family, even when that appearance demanded silence from others. The monarch had wanted harmony so badly that he had failed to ask whether everyone inside that harmony felt safe. Louise held the original card as she described seeing Elizabeth's name discarded. To her, it felt like part of her childhood had been removed for political convenience. Charles reached toward the card, then stopped. The king understood that it belonged with her now, not inside another archive or palace file. Charles asked whether she could ever forgive Camilla. Louise said forgiveness remained possible, but forgiveness did not guarantee intimacy. The Queen Consort could be accepted as part of Charles's life without being granted a maternal place in hers. The king made a clear promise. No royal would again be described as having a maternal, paternal, or guiding bond with a younger family member without that person's direct consent. The rule would protect private relationships from ceremonial invention. Louise then agreed to meet Camilla alone. She would not retract her words, but she would explain them without an audience, and establish a boundary neither palace language nor royal pressure could cross. Before she left, Charles warned her that the story had already escaped Windsor. The family had finally found a language of honesty, but outside the palace gates, Louise's 7 words were about to become a national verdict. By dawn, Louise's statement was no longer confined to Windsor. It appeared across television screens, radio bulletins, and newspaper stands as the most personal rejection Camilla had faced since becoming queen. Some saw cruelty, others saw courage. But the response changed when the story of the altered remembrance card emerged. Suddenly, the public was no longer debating whether Louise had been disrespectful. They were debating whether the palace had tried to manufacture affection. Broadcasters first presented the crisis as a generational struggle between a younger royal and the Queen Consort. That framing changed after palace communications confirmed that wording inside a private remembrance program had been restored following a family discussion. A remembrance program is the official written order and wording used during a memorial event. The statement was restrained, but it confirmed that something deeply personal had been changed and then reversed. Outside Windsor Castle, a small crowd gathered beside the long walk, carrying handwritten cards that read, "Love cannot be rewritten." The long walk is the ceremonial avenue leading toward the castle, often used during major royal gatherings. One elderly woman placed white flowers beneath a photograph of Queen Elizabeth II. Cameras captured the silence around her, and that single act became more powerful than any shouted protest. A leading morning newspaper printed Louise's 7 words across its front page above an image of the discarded card. The headline read, "The family line she would not let them cross." The story was no longer about manners. It had become a national argument over who possessed the right to define memory, trust, and belonging. Supporters praised Louise for defending personal truth. Critics answered that Camilla had endured years of rejection and deserved compassion rather than another public wound. The disagreement exposed how differently the pain of both women was understood. Louise was seen as protecting her past. The Queen Consort was seen as fighting for a place in the present. Charles feared that the reaction would make reconciliation impossible. The king worried that every private word would now be judged as victory or defeat. Louise refused to let public support become a weapon against Camilla. She wanted her boundary respected, not the older woman destroyed. Sophie then released one sentence from her daughter through a documented palace statement. "A boundary is not an act of hatred." The message shifted the debate away from punishment and toward consent, memory, and emotional honesty. Behind closed doors, Camilla agreed to meet Louise. As the noise outside Windsor reached its height, the 2 women at the center of the storm entered a room where neither titles nor headlines could protect them. The final meeting did not produce an embrace, a dramatic apology, or a miraculous declaration of love. It produced something more difficult: truth. Louise entered carrying the original card. Camilla arrived alone. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then the Queen Consort admitted she had confused acceptance of her position with entitlement to personal affection. Louise listened, placed the card between them, and explained that she could respect Camilla as Charles's wife without ever accepting her as family. The conversation took place privately at Windsor, with no aides, relatives, or written agenda. Both women had agreed that nothing said inside the room would be used for public advantage. A private family settlement is an understanding reached without formal ceremony, designed to resolve personal conflict rather than alter legal status. That distinction mattered because this was no longer about rank. It was about consent. Camilla acknowledged ordering the remembrance change because she believed visible acceptance from younger royals would finally end doubts surrounding her legitimacy within the family. The Queen Consort admitted that years of rejection had made her desperate for proof that she truly belonged. Yet in trying to secure that proof, she had crossed a line affection could never survive. Louise answered with equal honesty. Her declaration had not been intended to erase Camilla. It had been intended to stop the older woman from erasing relationships that had shaped her life. Sophie's care, Edward's steadiness, and Elizabeth's love could not be rearranged to create a cleaner palace story. Camilla apologized directly for replacing the late queen's name and allowing official language to imply a maternal bond Louise had never offered. She did not ask for the 7 words to be withdrawn. That restraint gave the apology its weight. Louise accepted it but kept her boundary. She agreed to treat Camilla with dignity at official occasions and family gatherings. The Queen Consort, in return, promised never again to describe herself as Louise's maternal figure, emotional guide, or chosen family. Camilla returned the altered card and asked Louise to destroy it. Louise placed it beneath the original instead. She said both should remain together as a warning of what happens when appearance is valued above truth. Charles later approved permanent guidance requiring consent before private relationships could appear in ceremonial programs, biographies, or public communications. Sophie and Edward finally understood that their daughter's refusal had not broken the family. It had forced the adults around her to stop confusing silence with harmony. Louise's 7 words did not remove Camilla from the monarchy or transform distance into affection. They created something more honest, respect without pretense. The monarchy survived not because Louise surrendered her truth, but because the family finally accepted that genuine unity begins where emotional pretense ends. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.